Welcome back, Honors. All right, welcome to, I don't know how y'all felt about sleeping in today and the fact that we get to sleep in tomorrow. Do not let this statue of a famine-ridden person from 1315 terrify you that this flip is going to be bad, because it's not. It's actually super interesting. I know for a fact my big nerds like Megan LaCour are going to love this thing because we're talking about the reason why the Renaissance occurred, right? So, big thing going into this that I need you to do. So we spent a lot of time talking about the big, large economic patterns of growth that are going to hit Italy, right? We made our map of Italy. We talked about Venice and Milan and Florence, right? We talked about them. We talked about a huge amount of things going on, economic influx going on that is going to lead to the Renaissance prosperity, right? Well, big thing I need you to write down to head this thing off is why, right? So just put why, question mark, right? And you can do an arrow pointing up, okay? Now, really big thing that you need to understand is we're trying to figure out why. Why did all this economic come back, right? Why then? Why in the late 1300s, early 1400s, did northern Italy all of a sudden decide that they wanted to be economically relevant and bring money back and lead to this big resurgence and everything else, right? So why? Why did the Renaissance occur? Where did this money come from? Why was this movement going on again? Why weren't they still decimated like the Middle Ages before? Because wasn't the late Middle Ages known for these things? Well, ironically enough, jot this down. The late Middle Ages and its crises caused the Renaissance. And one of the biggest reasons, one of the best reasons why this happened is because of the Black Plague, right? So the plague, ironically enough, caused, that's right, that's how you use the word irony, caused the Renaissance. You would think that it would have hindered it, but it actually caused the growth of the Renaissance, right? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Europeans were going through a massive population explosion, massive urbanization movements, big sedentary lifestyles. The Black Death is going to cause so much movement, and also these new people trying to find work, people being paid more for their work now because there's limited people in Europe that can actually do these things, is going to lead to economic growth, right? Because you got to look at it kind of like the pandemic we're dealing with now, right? The COVID-19 pandemic, which we are all desperately praying, ends sooner than it showed up, right? And the big thing you got to understand is the economy is hurting right now a little bit from this pandemic, right? We are seeing a lot of big things going on in communities and in neighborhoods supporting small and local business, which is awesome. I encourage y'all to actually try to buy at least one Christmas present from a local small business this year to help aid the economy in this crazy time. But what's going to happen to our economy once this is over? Whoosh! It's going to skyrocket, right? It's going to grow excessively because people are tired of being cooped up. They're tired of not being able to go to the movies. They're tired of not being able to do the things that they used to do, not being able to go to football games, not being able to go and do all the stuff. So not being able to have concerts, right? That's going to be a big thing. You're going to see massive economic explosion following this pandemic we're dealing with now. And so you actually saw economic explosion going in and causing the Renaissance because of the plague we're about to talk about now, right? So this pandemic. Now, first and foremost, though, you got to understand there's a big difference between the COVID-19 pandemic and the pandemic known as the Black Plague, right? And the biggest difference that you can cook it down into is the fact that one of them is caused by a virus, right? COVID-19 is a virus. COVID-19 viruses and viruses in general and viral pandemics work very differently than bacterial-based pandemics, right? Because they're just different in nature. One, bacteria is much larger than a virus is. Viruses are very, very tiny, airborne, completely unable to see, and I think they're only 10 microns big, right? They're very, very small. And you also have to understand the nature of it. COVID-19 pandemic we're dealing with now, that virus wants to get inside of you, get inside the epithelial cells inside of your lungs, right? It wants to then multiply itself and then push the new replicants out and then forces your body to go so it can shoot itself back in because it's all about how it loves to spread itself, right? Viruses are a little bit more smart in that way, okay? They know how to spread themselves and they want to move around, right? Oh, for example, jot this down as well. There was another big issue going on. Another big virus that was running around during this time period is known as cholera, right? Cholera is lives inside of water, right? Infected water. You drink the cholera then multiplies inside the lining of your stomach. It then needs to get out, so it then forces your body to go to the bathroom so it can then reinfect another source of water, right? So that's how viruses work. Now, bacteria pandemics like the Black Plague are different. This bacteria is known as Yersinia pestis, and it is a rod-shaped bacteria that looks just like that. That right there is the Black Death plague, right? That thing right there. Now look at the nature of it, right? We talked about this a second ago. Like viruses want to get into you and multiply, right? They want to get into you, make copies of themselves, get out, and then continue to spread, okay? Now look at this bacteria though. Bacteria, they want to find a host. It's different, okay? They want to use your body to make more copies of themselves by breeding and replicating, right? So, and then they will use up all they can inside of that body until it dies, hoping that some of them get scooped up and then moved on to another one by other inclement contact, right? So that's a little bit different. So bacteria just want to kind of harvest from you everything they can get before they eventually die. Another famous bacteria that you can get from like infected water sources is called what's it called? Necrotizing fasciitis, right? Which literally is the flesh-eating bacteria. It will eat every bit of your flesh as much as it can before it's either stopped or limited, and it just uses all of its resources and then eventually dies, right? So bacteria is a little bit different. So had we seen this before, though? No bacteria just goes, hello, I'm here, right? So Yersinia pestis has existed for thousands of years, right? Now, had it happened in history before the Middle Ages? Yes, it has, right? You've seen it once really, really big. Remember we talked about Justinian and the Byzantine Empire and how he got the plague, right? Yeah. The plague of Justinian originated around 500 AD, circa 500 AD. And under Justinian's rule in the Byzantine Empire, there was a large amount of plague going around. And a lot of this is due to like concentration, people living in cities, people migrating to Constantinople, things like that. But the plague of Justinian under his reign was a very serious problem. Justinian himself actually got it. Theodora ruled for him while he was sick. And somehow he lived, right? I'm to this day want to know how he pulled that off. Because that's an amazing little like tidbit I could use to be like, hey, you want to know how like not bright people were in Western Europe? Well, Justinian got the plague and didn't die, right? Like so, like, but anyway, the plague of Justinian was a big issue. And then also we think maybe that the plague of Athens might have also been the Yersinia pestis. However, we haven't found forensic historical evidence to show that it was, right? We actually have dead bodies and skeletal remains from the plague of Justinian, and there are dead bacteria inside of the remains of those bodies, so we know that it did hit the Byzantine at one point, right? Now, so it's going to rise again, though, in the Middle Ages in Western Europe. And here's the thing. Was the Middle Ages just perfect for the Yersinia pestis bacteria to spread everywhere? Yes, it was. All right, so jot this down. In the late Middle Ages, right, actually coming out of the high Middle Ages, so about like from starting in about 1200, you're going to see a massive amount of people start moving to towns and cities, right? Now, this is a part of the short answer question that will be on your test, right? We're going to talk about why the plague happened, and then you're going to have to go further and talk about how the plague then caused the Renaissance, okay? This is going to be a longer short answer that's going to be on your test. It's actually going to be a multiple paragraph short answer, so more like an essay, okay? So now, why were people moving to towns and cities, though, Mr. Terry, in the late Middle Ages? I'm really curious. Well, a lot of it has to do with technological innovation, right? So you have to understand is that two new things were created in Middle Ages countrysides that was forcing people to move to towns and cities. And those two devices are known as the plow and the mill, right? The plow and the mill are going to create a need for workers to move, right? Because the plow, what it does is you can see a picture of it right here. It used to take 20 to 30 people to do what's known as turning a field, right? So back in the Middle Ages, before the plow was invented, before, where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going? Where are we going? All right, so before this device was created, it took a classroom of our size to flip or turn a field. Every single one of you would be given I'm going to say a farm tool, and you're going to try not to giggle, all right? So, like, every one of you would be given a hoe, right? And you would literally scrape into the ground and flip the dirt over to prepare it for planting, right? And you would shift everything into rows. Now, interestingly enough, though, the plow is going to now take a job that used to be for 20 people and make it capable by 2 people and 4 ox, right? So now, what happens to the rest of you, right? Marissa and Colleen might be the ones running the plow, but the rest of us all just lost a job. Now what are we going to do, right? So also the mill is a big one because the mill is going to basically mechanize the production of flour, right? So you see the water wheel right here? That would turn a grinding stone and grind wheat into flour. And as you can see, this person right here is just what? just waiting, right? Just waiting for it to be done. So you're limiting the need for workers there. Every single one of you that's had a science class in your past knows what a mortar and pestle is, right? Like the little grinding thing, the little bowl, and you're like, You have to take that stupid test before every science class. It's like, what about lab safety? Well, the mill's kind of like that, right? People used to have to grind it with big stone grinders, like to make flour so they could then make bread. Well, the mill instead is going to use water power to do that, and it's going to limit the need for workers. So what's going to happen is you're going to see people moving to towns and cities because they have lost their job, right? Like they don't have a job anymore because the plow and the mill have like made them obsolete, right? They're going to move to towns and cities which were surrounded by very, very large walls. So once the cities themselves got packed out, they started building new floors onto the town, like homes and things like that. They would rent these things out. Newcomers would sometimes settle outside. Some people rented. But the thing about it is, I want you to imagine a city like this. Look at it. It's overcrowded, right? It's overcrowded. Jot this down. Jot this down. The state of cities in the late Middle Ages, okay? Overcrowded. Disgusting. No sewage system, right? So you literally got human waste in the streets, right? And if you actually had a smart enough city to take it outside of the walls, hooray, right? So, yeah, you got human waste around. Dead bodies because there's no like funerary services or services that are inclined to go find people in their homes that have died, pull them out, and then take them to burial yards. So you had it was ripe for infection, right? So the fact that the plow and the mill are going to push people into these cities, that's going to create a state of readiness for the plague, right? Then, on top of everything else, you've got this issue of a famine that pops up in 1315 to 1317, right? So in 1315, you have to understand most Europeans were farming every scrap of land they could get their hands on, right? And also, this led to a population spike, okay? Now, population is going to rise in the 1300s. You're going to see overcrowding in these cities because of that population explosion, okay? Then, out of nowhere, the climate shifts, right? So, in 1315 to 1317, you're going to see the beginning of what was known as the mini ice age, right? So there's going to be a big significant dip in the average temperature during 1315 to 1317. Now, some people will oftentimes argue, be like, oh, well, does this explain the climate shifts that we're going through now? Not actually. If you actually look at these climate graphs that are like circulating around now, so this was the medieval warm period that occurred before the plague, causing that population growth, because in warmer periods you can grow more food, you can feed more people, you feed more people, they make more babies, right? So you're going to see this happen right here, but notice what's happening as it's coming down, right? So this is right here, 1315 to 1317. You're seeing a significant dip in average temperature, right? And that's going to lead to a heck of a lot of rain, a lot of drowned crops, and a period of famine that's going to precede the Black Death. So the famine created an issue of starvation, which makes your body very, very susceptible to disease, right? So now some people, like I said before, have always been like, oh, does this explain the climate changes that we're going in through now? Well, not actually, because if you look at a 1300 graph, like compared to the modern era, it like, yes, rose back up here, but now we're like all the way up here, right? We're seeing significant growth in different climates, which is really, really rough because it's also measured in degrees Celsius. So this is going to be a problem though, because from 1315 to 1317, as many as 15% of peasants in some English villages are going to die from starvation. And I know I have this annoyingly in 4 bullet points, but it's actually 1. And one consequence of starvation and poverty is going to be that their populace of Europe is now going to be much more susceptible to disease, right? So people are going to be able to get sicker easier because they haven't been eating as well. Yes, food trends return to about normal in about 1322, but you literally also still had the lingering issue of like decreased temperatures and things like that. And then out of nowhere, within 20 years, there's this bacteria that pops up somewhere in Asia. We're not positive where. As we know, like I said, it's not like it was only exclusively in Asia because it actually had originated in Europe before it ever existed in Asia because of the Byzantine Empire. So there could be remnants of it coming from Turkey and things like that. We're not positive where it came from, but we do believe that it's going to reach Europe in 1347 via a merchant ship on the island of Sicily, right? So if you actually jump down here to this map, you can see right here in 1347, this is where we believe Patient Zero got off a boat in Italy and started to spread the plague around Italy, and then it began to spread through all of Europe, right? Now, you can notice right here, that city, like this little line, see all the purple lines? This is the movement of the plague, right? Now, you see this purple line coming from an area off the Black Sea, right? We believe, historically, that the person, the one singular individual that brought the plague to Europe that would kill 50% of the populace in Europe during the 1300s was from this city called Kaffa, right? So, and Kaffa is in modern-day Crimea off the coast of the Black Sea. And we believe, now this is interesting, jot this down, the Mongolians attacked that city, right? So the Mongolian empires under Genghis Khan and the Khans, right, were growing at a massive rate. Now, Genghis Khan was dead by this point, and Kublai Khan, his son, was ruling. But they were very well known for using biological warfare, right? They would sometimes take dead bodies that they knew had died from a disease or a specific thing, and they would use a catapult to launch that body over city walls and into the city, where that body would then go and explode, and they were hoping that it would spread disease for a limited enough time, so once everyone inside the city died or left, they could then come in there after the disease is cleared out, and then take, raid, or pillage whatever they wanted, right? So we believe at that little first purple line at the city of Kaffa right here, we believe that that city was attacked by Mongolians, so the very first European person may have got it from that attack, and then gone to Italy on a boat, and then, go figure what happens, it begins to spread. And it spreads quickly, right? From 1347 to 1348, it reaches southern Europe. By 1350, it reaches the British Isles. Some of you are probably like, Mr. Terry, what about this one random little khaki part here in the middle? Well, look, Julia, calm down, okay? Well, you have to understand is that this place is called Hnrs, and they had heard about the spread of the plague, and they walled off their city to any outsiders, right? So they actually were able to stay away from the plague. Hnrs. Good way to go, Polish people. Good job. All right, so now look. Well, it's actually Polish, Ukrainian, that area. Now, how do you get the plague, though, right? So we know it's in Europe now, but how did you get it, right? Everybody blames the rats. The rats have little to do with it, all right? So the big reason why you're going to get the plague is due to the fact that, one, merchants are spreading it everywhere, right? Traders and merchants are the guys spreading the plague all over the place. Now, there are three types of plague you could be diagnosed with, okay? One, the most common one, is the bubonic plague, right? And the bubonic plague came from not infected rats, but infected fleas, okay? So fleas were on the rats, okay? So since the fleas were on the rats, they would bite into the rats, and rats and rodents are carriers of that bacteria. It doesn't kill them or affect them the same way it does humans. But infected fleas would bite this rat, and then they would suck some of that blood in, and they would bring in some of that bacteria accidentally. And the bacteria would then begin to cultivate and then begin to grow, because remember, what did I say about bacteria? They're all about creating more of themselves as much as they possibly can. They would eat that blood inside of the flea's throat, causing a blockage of bacteria, right? So the next time the flea jumped onto somebody else, then what happens is that flea bites you and goes, and to clear that blockage out, it goes, and it throws or vomits the plague, not virus, it's supposed to say bacteria, but vomits the plague bacteria into you. That's how you got the bubonic plague, is typically because of fleas. And were fleas everywhere during the Middle Ages during this time? Yes. And where were the fleas especially? In cities, right? Because rats are going to be attracted to human activity because it's easy pickings for food and stuff like that, right? Now, really quickly though, is it just the city's fault? Is it just all this? No. Trading and merchant activity was a big reason why, okay? Since people are moving around trading a little bit more often now, like going out of Byzantine, Constantinople, things like that, the fleas were, listen to me closely, the fleas were on the rats were on the boats moved all over Europe, right? So, like, now you're talking about traders and merchants are like the occupation that is most to blame for the spread of the plague. And it'll get also, especially for the bubonic plague, right? You could sometimes get it from handling dead animals. You could sometimes get it from a rat scratching or biting you, but that was pretty rare. Now, the pneumonic plague is how people spread the plague to each other. So the plague bacteria is dangerous because it lives inside of blood, right? Like, that's where it wants to exist and it wants to live, is inside of blood. Now, when you get the plague bacteria, what does occur is in one of your third stages or fourth stages of having it, one of your symptoms, is you get pneumonia, right? And pneumonia is the collection of blood at the base, or collection of blood and fluid at the base of your lungs, right? And that becomes a breeding ground for bacteria. And so when you have stuff inside your lungs, what does your body naturally want to do? It wants to cough to get it out, right? And so when you cough, you're shooting droplets of infected blood out into the air. People breathe that in. That's how you got the pneumonic plague, right? So that is going to be a big weapon. The Mongolians are going to use the pneumonic plague because when these bodies would burst, it would cause like a pfft, and then you would inhale it. That's how you got it from the Mongolian attack. Then you got septicemic plague. Septicemic is the third type of plague that it's kind of like bubonic and pneumonic turn into this. Septicemic plague is when your body systems shut down and you basically begin to rot from the inside out. And that's 100% death rate. And some of y'all are like, wait, Mr. Terry, what are you talking about? There's no way that much stuff comes out of your face whenever you sneeze or cough. I disagree. Because if we take 2 seconds to look at, like, big reason why we're wearing masks at school and everything like that, like, if you look at this nastiness coming out of one guy's face whenever he sneezed, that's why the plague was able to spread so quickly. Hoofa, that is gross, right? Like, let's rewind it again. I'm sure some people like, I'm sure Colleen and Megan and y'all want to see that again. Like, look at, like, there was a big ladder stage, just a bleh, that's from a sneeze. And air and those droplets are coming out of your face almost 60 miles an hour when you sneeze. That is gross, all right? So, but that's the pneumonic plague. That's how you spread the pneumonic plague. Now, symptoms of the plague are vast and very different. Some people would have bleeding orifices where their eyes would literally bleed and their little ears would bleed because of rupturing blood cells from the bacteria. You had some people who got pneumonia and died that way. Now, the biggest image of the plague, though, when you got septicemic plague was this symptom called lenticulation, right? And lenticulation is when you got black spots all over you. And that is why it was called the Black Plague, was because your flesh was literally rotting, right? And then another symptom was this thing. That's called a bulbous. It's where your lymph nodes would actually try to consolidate some of that bacteria to keep it from spreading, and then the bacteria would multiply inside your lymph node, and it would cause this gigantic lump on your body, right? Now, remember, though, it's the Middle Ages, so people are going to try to figure out how to cure this the best they possibly can. And some of these cures aren't going to be the best things you've ever heard of before, right? So the big thing about it is you're going to see popular medical cures, right? You should put medical in quotes because they weren't actually cures. They actually spread the plague much worse, right? Big ones include the fact that doctors are going to wear like really strange costumes, right? Like, so one of the big ones is going to be the plague doctor outfits, which are going to be a very popular, very, very well-known image of the plague in Europe, right? Actually, we can see it if you go back and watch the live-action version of Beauty and the Beast. It is actually alluded to that Beth's mom dies from the plague due to the fact that when you see like the plague doctor show up at that moment. So they would actually wear these costumes. And some of you are probably like, well, my dad's a historian, and he said that there's only like 3 accounts of people ever wearing these. I mean, that's true, yeah. There's only like 3 or 2 engravings of it ever actually occurring, and they were all made after the plague. But, like, I mean, come on. So, it's just really interesting. You got to teach people about this stuff, right? So the plague doctor outfits were a very, very popular idea in Europe of medical curing the plague. The reason why they have bird beaks is because they would apparently shove spices and herbs into the end of them so they wouldn't have to smell the dead bodies, right? Another big one was bathing in human urine. Another big one was wearing excrement. Oh, that's literally human waste. Placing dead animals in your house. Leeching yourself constantly, which actually was not a very good idea because the second you took that leech and put it on somebody else, it then spread the plague further. Drinking molten gold and powdered emeralds and burning incense were very popular medical cures. None of that actually worked, right? But as you could tell, the plague is going to eventually end because in 1350, you start to see the plague tamper off a little bit. Now, interestingly enough, though, you also need to jot down, the plague didn't truly end in Europe until like the 1700s. There would be many outbreaks all over Europe for certain time periods, right? But the big reason why the plague's finally going to end is due to simple concepts, right? One is quarantine. Quarantining people is going to be the biggest reason why the plague finally ends, and that is actually going to be adopted in Italy, and Italy is going to be able to get rid of it first, and that's going to be a big reason why the Renaissance begins there, right? So, but quarantine is supposed to be isolating infected people away from the uninfected. Now, look at the word quarantine, right? It's an Italian word which means 40, right? So, 40, quaranta, right? 40 days, right? Because when boats began to show up at the shores of Italy during the plague, they would force the people that were on those boats to live on those boats for 40 straight days to make sure none of them actually had the plague before they were allowed to get off, right? So quarantining, literally meaning 40. They originally did 30 days, but they thought that that wasn't enough, so they upped it to about 40 days, right? So quarantining or isolating uninfected people away was very big. Moving, people began to also spread out, right? So from when these cities were so jam-packed, they began to move to rural areas, particularly wealthy people, because that meant that they had estates outside the cities, but they moved to rural areas for a short time away from crowded cities. Hygiene, people after the Middle Ages plague virus or plague bacteria epidemic, they're going to be like, oh, maybe I should wash my hands and stuff more. That's going to be a big reason why we finally start tamping down this bacteria. Remember, it's bacteria, it's not a viral infection. Cleaner air, this is an interesting one. We believe also that because of the dipping in temperatures that more people began to burn fires in their home. Plague bacteria cannot live. Yersinia pestis cannot live in elevated temperatures over, I think, like 150 degrees. It dies. And so people having fires in their home. And apparently a pope was the first one to figure this out. When he was anointing the sick, he never got the plague because he had 2 huge fires burning next to him at all times. And we believe that that actually is going to be a big contributor to why the plague is going to kind of tamp down. Travel and migration is going to slow down as well, and also periods without war. So if any of y'all notice, because you're super, super smart, you're going to be like, oh, wait, this was going on during the 100 Years' War. It was, actually. And the 100 Years' War literally took a break for like almost 10 to 15 years because of the plague bacteria, the plague epidemic, right? Now, there are going to be massive effects of the plague as well, okay? Biggest effects of the plague are going to be upsurge in faith and religion. And I'm going to start moving a little faster here just because I don't want this to take up your entire break, right? And you're going to have one more after this. I'll probably record and post that tomorrow, okay? Now, you're going to see an upsurge in faith and religion, which is going to be a very, very big importance, okay? Economy, which is going to be positively affected. You're going to see culture heavily influenced, especially in art. You're going to see a population decrease, which we'll talk about here in a second. You're also going to see the growth of anti-Semitism, right? But let's go ahead and get into it. So, in the big one, this is the example. Don't write the attempts to stop the plague. Don't write that. Do not write this. I forgot to delete it. But example of upsurge in faith, right? So a big thing you're going to see pop up is an actual upsurge in faith, right? A lot of people believe that like Christianity would take a hit due to the plague because people would be like, why would God do this to us? But ironically enough, it didn't happen that way. People actually became more committed to their religion and their faith. A lot of them had looked at priests and monks and nuns and they were like, why didn't they get the plague? And they originally thought that it was because of their religious ideals and also the fact they were closer to God, they were less sinful. It's actually because they lived in monasteries and convents away from everybody else was a big reason why they didn't get it. But people, the general populace in Europe is actually going to look to them and be like, oh, well, monks and nuns didn't get it nearly as bad. So maybe it's because they were less sinful, right? And also you're going to see little other trends pop up like flagellance, right? Flagellante is going to become a big thing, which is going to be like self-inflicted penance. Literally, there were these groups of people known as flagellants that would walk around Europe and they would be like, oh, to protect ourselves from plague, we must hurt ourselves, right? They would literally like hit themselves in the face. They would whip each other. They would bind their legs, right? And they would basically do like self-inflicted penance, right? So you're going to see a very intense uptick in faith during the plague period, right? You're also going to see the culture become influenced, right? Art is going to be influenced by, or what little bits of art were being made in the late Middle Ages. You're going to see an obsession with death in art, right? This is one of the most famous pieces of post-plague era art. This is called Danse Macabre, which literally means the dance of the dead, right? They're actually welcoming new dead bodies in as the people die from the plague, right? So plague art is going to be, or art is going to become very, very obsessed with death, right? The economy also is going to be heavily affected as well. The economy during and after the plague, during it, you're going to have high unemployment and a massive amount of economic stagnation, right? Which means that people are losing money. But after that, people are going to be thinned out, right? You're going to have less people, okay? And since you have less people, you're going to see more specialized crops, you're going to see more specialized jobs, and you're going to see more money in the hands of individuals, right? Because let's look at it this way. Let's say hypothetically there were 5 of us in the classroom that all made shoes. We were all part of a cobbler's guild, right? And that means that 5 of us had to compete with each other very, very aggressively to sell our product, right? So since there's 5 of us, we all had to keep lowering our prices so we could move these items, okay? Well, now since I died, Megan died, who else died? Madeline died, and then also Courtney died, and the only one left around is Ava, right? Ava sells her shoes still. Since she is now the only one left that knows how to do this, her labor is going to be heavily valued, and she is going to make more money, right? Because like she can charge more for her work. So you're actually going to see the economy go massively up following the plague period, okay? So also you're going to see, this is a really, really big one, 25 to 30 million people in Europe. That's close to 50 are going to be dead, right? So 50%. We believe it's anywhere from 30% to 50% of all the people in Europe died. And then also, I don't really need to explain anti-Semitism, I don't think, but anti-Semitism is the industrialized idea of the hatred of Jewish people, all right? So, because what's going to happen is, in the Jewish territories, because they didn't die off nearly as bad because middle-aged cities had forced them to live in communities outside of cities, away from them, and also in collective areas together, the Jewish people just didn't get plague very often, right? So, and the Europeans were then blaming it on them, saying, oh, it's because you gave it to us, right? Which anti-Semitism is going to be a huge issue and really stupid. It is an example of unlearnedness in the Middle Ages, but you are going to see anti-Semitism pop up following the plague, which is absolutely disgusting and very, very terrible. But we're going to end it there. That is the plague period in Europe, right? So we are going to see this affect the Renaissance, and that big why is because the economy booms after this, right? So y'all have a good one. I'll see you guys tomorrow.